Can you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself? What should we know about you?
Well, I've been a minister for 30 plus years. I was one of those um, now progressively rare candidates who entered ministry as a first career in my 20s. I have a partner named Virginia. We have 4 kids, 2 sons who are at university, and a daughter who's training to be a surgeon in Halifax, and another daughter who is a data manager and engineer in Hamilton. And there are 2 little grandchildren named Louis and Elodie. Oh. And the magnetic pull of Louis and Elodie are a big part of the reason for the move to Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's adorable. That's great. So why did you become a minister? What led you down this path?
Well, when I look at this in the rearview mirror, it looks probably a little different than it did when I was making the choice. But I would say that a spiritual crisis that happened when my father was killed in a car accident when I was 13 was a big reason for me first becoming a part of the church, secondly seeking spiritual answers to big questions, and then eventually going into ministry. I wasn't brought up in the church, but not long after that accident, I'd been invited to a leadership training camp just to kind of becoming a leader, and I didn't know it was at a church camp. It was McLennan Memorial United Church Camp in Nova Scotia, and I found the gospel, the love in Christian community, and the gospel's responses to big questions, or ways to live into big questions, really compelling. And so I started to make my way into Christian leadership that way.
Oh, that's really cool. So it wasn't like you kind of always knew this would be your path. It happened later on.
No, until I was about 18, I figured I'd either be a lawyer or a sports broadcaster. If I had been a better athlete, I would have wanted to be a professional athlete, but I was mediocre at many sports.
That's funny. So what are you most looking forward to about being at Bloor Street?
There's a number of things that are really exciting. I think that the leaving the building for 4 years is a tremendous opportunity. Mm-hmm. I know it's a hassle. I know that it involves a tremendous amount of work and disruption, but I think it's a reality now that church as we have known it is in the process of disappearing. Mm. Religion mainline Christianity anyway, is becoming post-institutional and maybe post-denomination. Mm-hmm. And so this church has an opportunity to just sort of empty itself out into the world for 4 years or so and really press the reset button on what it means to be a faith community in this time. And so I'm really looking forward to an opportunity to do that. Mm. There's a theological term called kenosis, which means self-emptying. And theologically, we understand Jesus Christ to have self-emptied when he became human, and then also at his crucifixion and his passion. So kenosis is generally not comfortable, but it is necessary for renewal.
Huh. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. Huh. That's very cool. So in your view, in your mind, what gives a church or a faith community the ability to thrive as a community, as a body of faith? How does that happen?
Well, I think there are a number of things, and I think that there are particular qualities in this time that are really important for thriving. It's interesting that you asked me this question because 2 days ago, Rob Fennell, the dean at AST, and I published a book called Turning Ourselves Inside Out, the Thriving Christian Communities Project, a fairly sizable Christian publisher in the United States called Fortress Press released it 2 days ago. And so we spent 5 years investigating thriving Christian communities in Canada and the Western US. And a number of qualities stood out. One is the story that the church tells itself.
Mm.
So you could have two different churches, and one of them could be saying no to homophobia and no to oppression of indigenous people, and no to predatory economic policies, and no to environmental degradation. And you'll notice that the story they're telling themselves is that we are about a lot of no's.
Mm-hmm.
You can have another congregation that says yes to queer people, yes to queering theology, yes to indigenous people, yes to justice-oriented economics, yes to the earth and new ways of living on it. And you'll notice the internal narrative of the two is going to be very different, because one's about affirmation and one's about rejection. And so working at an internal narrative of affirmation, I think that's one quality. I think another is courage in this time. I don't know of any thriving Christian communities that aren't taking risks at this time. And sometimes the risks lead to failures, noble failures, that cause us to learn things and start over again. I think that in this time, leadership that's open-hearted and embodied and touched by the quality of love is really important, and leads to thriving. And it needs to be shared amongst not just the clergy, but a variety of people. And then I mentioned already kenosis. I think that faith communities that are not open to perpetual renewal, to letting go of old sacred cows, even sacred cows that old wisdom that 20 years ago or 10 years ago was exactly right for the time, that kind of wisdom can crystallize and be held onto and become dogmatic and ideological. And whereas once it was wisdom and blessing, now it's part of the problem. And so I think thriving requires surrendering the things we held dear, even important teachings, and letting those very teachings have the wheat and the chaff sifted so that they can express themselves afresh.
So it sort of sounds like transformation might be a bit of a theme that something you might be bringing.
Yeah, and it's important. I think I've talked to you about this and a couple of people in the last couple of days. When you think about leading a church, you want to do leadership that attends to the congregation that exists, but you also want to do leadership that attends to the congregation that might be, the congregation that's imagined in the eye of the divine. And you have to give time and energy to both of those things, even though sometimes they're just in tension with each other.
Do you think that tension is necessarily a bad thing, or do you think it needs to be in harmony? Or
well, I think it's like improvisational jazz. You have the harmony, you have the melody, then you wander off and you lose it, and then you come back. And so there's no creativity without tension, and there's probably no real growth without conflict. And so I don't think it's good to be addicted to tension or to conflict. And I think times of harmonization are really important, but so is tension.
Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. I like that. The next question here is about what you hope to achieve at Bloor Street. You've sort of touched on this a bit. Is there anything more that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of concrete things about achievement. Partially because how would I know? I don't know Bloor Street well enough to know concrete goals, except for broadly stated ones, like I would hope to engage a very diverse circle of people, or circles within circles. So I really hope to grow into relationship with BIPOC people and to help create a community that is more welcoming of BIPOC people. The same for queer people, the same for younger people, the same for for elderly people and marginalized people, people with mental health. But how to do that in this context, whether it be Bloor Street or Toronto, I don't know the context or the congregation well enough to articulate specific targets or goals. I will say, I think one of my jobs will be to host a conversation about all those things.
Mhm.
So, and that's one of the things that I've done. You know, I had the great privilege for 7 years of being the co-chair of the United Church's Living into Right Relations task group that worked with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I got to watch Indigenous elders and wise Christian leaders host conversations about really challenging things all around the country. And I've worked hard, and I did my PhD on truth and reconciliation processes. So I think one of the things I've developed some skills for is hosting conversations about challenging transitions. And so one goal I have is to, with other leaders, find a way to host the conversation for Bloor Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. That sounds great. So we have a couple of little quick questions. Do you have any pets, or are you thinking of getting any now that you're here?
Virginia and I have a 6-pound dog. I'm not convinced that Kobe actually is canine. I think he may be a combination of a cat and some kind of rodent, but he thinks he's a dog. And he's alternately very affectionate and 6 pounds of aggression. So he's frequently got small dog syndrome.
Yeah.
So he's about the right size for a 15-story condo in the village. So
Yeah.
we have him.
Oh, that's adorable. Do you have a favorite book or movie?
Yeah, I have a bunch of them. You know, I read your questions that you forwarded to me, and I was going through them, and I realized that my favorite books, and I was having lunch at the St. Lawrence Market and thinking about this, and all the things I was thinking of are located at the intersection of spirituality, masculinity or male identity, and violence, which is what does that say about me and whether I need a new therapist? But Lawrence of Arabia is one of my favorite movies. 2001: A Space Odyssey is another one of my favorite movies. The books of John le Carre, I've read all of them at least once, and they really speak to me. So, and I guess that, you know, going back to what led me into ministry, where those things intersect, that's been a kind of nexus that I've been working on my whole life. Partially, I guess, trying to figure out in a world in which men and straight white men have been so much a part of colonization and so much of part of the violence that has issued from colonization. I guess I realized I've been trying to, almost at an archetypal level, work my way into that and think, is there a more healthy and helpful way for sort of privileged straight white men to live into this world with some spirit?
Mm-hmm.
So I've just been reflecting on this since you sent me the question. So thank you. I learned something about myself today in response to what you asked.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's good for us to, you know, kind of interrogate ourselves and just do that reflection. That's cool. Yeah. What are your hobbies? What do you do for fun?
Well, I do some things every day. I meditate. I do yoga or Pilates and Tai Chi. I don't know if they're hobbies. I just think that, you know, Desmond Tutu said once, if he doesn't take time to do spiritual practice in the morning, he feels physical pain during the day. I also think I've learned that if I don't take time to meditate and do spiritual practice in the morning, the people around me experience pain during the day.
Yeah.
So I do those things and I enjoy them, but they're more a discipline than a hobby.
Mhm.
I really love time in the outdoors. I love kayaking and canoeing. And until COVID, annually, I would go for at least 2 or 3 weeks of camping, usually alone in the desert every year. I love the desert and think it has much to teach us. So I look forward to a time when I can go back there. And sometimes I go with others. Virginia and I have gone. My son Sam has come with me. I spent a lot of time in Death Valley,
Okay.
and that's a hobby of mine.
Huh. That's really cool. Yeah, I bet that's like a really good time of introspection.
It is a really good time of introspection. You know, the desert is, I learned a lot from the desert. I first went for a long, long time when I was going through a crisis, actually a divorce. And I had to let go of a lot of things. And what I learned about the desert by sitting in it and observing it and then reading about it is that a desert is actually something in the process of disappearing, as is a canyon. It's land that's being eroded and blown away.
Mm.
And it is beautiful and it gives such a gift and it hosts a lot of life. And so it's again back to the notion of kenosis. Disappearing beautifully was something that I learned a lot about. So in a culture that is so often neurotically oriented towards achievement and building things up and
Mhm.
constructing things and marking success, 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 I find it a big relief just to get out of it and to go to a desert and see the beauty in the opposite of that, which is in disappearance.
Mhm.
And often the spiritualities of the desert, so the desert mothers and fathers of early Christianity, or monks who go into the desert in places like St. Catherine's Monastery today, or the spirituality of indigenous people who've lived in the desert, is really has a lot of harmony with that.
Hmm. Huh. It's cool. So you mentioned you do like meditation and yoga and stuff. And something that I find is for me when I try to do like any sort of daily like spiritual practice, I can never quite keep up with it. It sort of falls off and then I get off track and it's hard to start that up again. Do you have, yeah, I guess any advice on how to keep that up or how to, yeah, just reflections on, maybe it doesn't have to be a daily thing or like, yeah, just thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, there is one, you did put your finger on one thing. For me, it's got to be daily,
Hmm.
but not for everybody. Some people, it's like doing Sabbath every month and taking 3 or 4 days and going. For some people, it's weekly. Um, and so it's important for each person to find her or his or their rhythm and to honor that and to not think that your practice has to be as shaped or disciplined in the same way as mine. For those who want um, a daily practice, I find it's really helpful to make a covenant with yourself for a season and to just say, I'm going to commit to this for Lent or for 100 days or whatever.
Hmm.
And just say, that's it. I'm going to do that, because it's a lot easier to keep committing if you know that there's a get out of jail free card down the road. And then
Hmm.
afterwards, you can reassess and say, hey, did that work for me?
Huh.
Also, ironically, I think that one thing that can be quite helpful is caffeine,
Okay.
which is like I tend to get irritable or nervous or jumpy if I caffeinate when I don't either exercise or do spiritual practice. But if I've worked late and I haven't had time to get, I haven't had a good night's sleep, but I really want to get up and meditate, I get up and I make coffee and I make that part of the ritual. I take time to smell the coffee. I take time to enjoy the taste of it. I take time to feel it going into my body. And then I go into the practice. And then the energy of the caffeine of the coffee or the tea often becomes part of the practice itself. So it becomes part of the breathing deeply and working with our bodies, as opposed to what caffeine often does to us when we take it unconsciously, which is shorten our breath and make us, a little bit edgy.
Yeah.
And that may not work for everybody, a cold shower, but spiritual practice is physical. I mean, even if it's just sitting and meditating or if it's reading. And so if you think about, what do I need to do to my body? 20 push-ups, a nice slow walk, a cold shower, strong cup of coffee to get my body ready to practice. That can be really helpful.
That's a good way to look at it. It's good advice.
Yeah, and then when you don't practice, like, guilt is useless here.
Yeah.
So, right, it's you reset, and you're off the hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think it's easier said than done, but yeah, that's a good thing to try to cultivate. So you have just moved to Toronto. Have you gotten to explore it much at all, or have you been too busy?
Well, I've been exploring Toronto for 30 some years, intermittently. When I was a minister in rural churches, I was very strategic about getting appointed to national committees, because it would bring me to a cosmopolitan area and I get to hang with other young ministers. So I would always, if it was a 3-day meeting, I'd come for 5 or 6 days and I would stay with friends, and I would explore Toronto. So I've known Toronto for that time and I've enjoyed it, and I've walked many parts of it. But since we got here 2 weeks ago, I've walked hundreds of kilometers, partially because I'm a little reticent to be on the TTC when it's busy.
Yeah.
But I just love walking this city. So, today at lunchtime, I had a little extra time. So I walked down to the St. Lawrence Market to have lunch. And I'm looking forward to exploring a little bit further afield. But yeah, I mean, had one Saturday on Toronto Island with the grandkids and the family. And yeah, I look forward to exploring more.
Yeah.
The ravines are spectacular.
Yeah, they're really great. Are you looking for any recommendations, like anything people can help you out with, like restaurants or stores?
Oh no, yes, I'm happy to have recommendations for everything. Restaurants are a disaster for me because I'm allergic to dairy, gluten, soy, and egg yolk.
Oh.
And when I was overseas personnel for the United Church in Fiji, I got a parasite that it took 2 years to diagnose, and by that time it had done a lot of damage to my small intestine. And so there's a lot of stuff I'm not able to digest. But if people know of restaurants that are really good at managing allergies, I'd love to hear about that. Steakhouses are often good.
Okay.
So, or seafood, but especially any place that's good at managing allergies. Also, any recommendations for little pockets of nature to be found within GTA that I might visit and enjoy, I would really look forward to.
Yeah. Well, I was just on the Beltline this past weekend, so if you haven't been there yet, I'd recommend the Beltline Trail.
The Beltline Trail.
Yep, it's a little bit north of downtown.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah, great. All right, last question. Do you have any message you want to give to Bloor Streeters? Anything you want them to know?
Well, it's such a weird time to start a pastoral relationship, COVID. So I guess what I would say is I don't really know how to do this. I've never started a pastoral relationship in a pandemic before. I haven't started a pastoral relationship in 16 years. So please be patient with me, but also please give feedback. Like I need constructive feedback. Positive feedback is great because it's, it inspires confidence. I'm happy to receive that, but I'm also keen to get feedback about things that I might be able to do better or more helpfully, especially if that can be offered a little bit gently. It's a lot better to, if I'm making a mistake or I'm doing something that's troublesome to people, it's a lot better to hear it earlier and gently than after I've made that mistake so many times that somebody,
Yeah.
is thinking about going somewhere else or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my email is just russ@bloorstreetunited.org. And I really am happy to hear. I'm also really happy to go out for coffee with people. And I'd like to meet as many people as I can in person. So for those who are comfortable doing that, even in the midst of a pandemic, don't be afraid to be in touch.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you so much for, answering these questions, and welcome again to Bloor Street and Toronto. We're happy that you're here.
I'm happy I'm here too.
Yeah.
So thanks for taking the time. Thanks for thinking through such skillful questions, and cheers.